Okay, welcome to Into the Channel, a podcast primarily about women's football. Real quick before we hit the pitch, if you enjoy the show or love women's football as much as your boys do, we invite you to follow us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you like to watch or listen. Ratings and reviews always appreciated at ITC_pod on X, at Into the Channel pod on Threads. Lots of happenings domestically. We've got some Netflix news. We've got some NWSL expansion draft updates to parse through. I am your host, Dino DeCespedes, and as always, I am joined by my co-host, Mr. Grant Engel. What is up, man?
You know, sometimes I get tempted when we talk about the NWSL or the U.S. Women's National Team to say, let's talk about some American football, but that could be a misnomer. That doesn't quite cover it. So I like that you threw out the term domestic. Let's talk about our domestic league, our domestic national squad. You know, two topics that usually have some pretty interesting things surrounding them, I would say.
That's fair to say. A lot happening here in the good old USNA. A certain documentary about a certain U.S. Women's National Team on a streaming site you may or may not have heard of. This documentary, dropping this week, details and illuminates the USA's most recent World Cup run, including a one Megan Rapinoe's final chance at World Cup glory, her last dance, if you will. This one drops tomorrow. I can't wait to see what kind of cable news level PR spin we get here. Full disclosure, I root for this U.S. team, but I don't know. There was just something about the vibes around this most recent run. We talked about it pretty much all summer that had me pretty sure that this wasn't going to be our year. I think we're going to learn a lot from the doc, and I think it's safe to say some characters will get a much kinder edit than others. I'll leave it at that. Mr. Grant Engel, what will you be watching out for when this one drops tomorrow?
Well, I appreciate you leaving it at that some characters will get a kinder edit than others. I think I'm very interested to see the framing around Vlatko Andonovski, because I think he's the fella who the edit might not be that kind to. Now, I don't think they're going to flame him, because I think the players generally like him as a dude. I thought that was a big part of why he got the gig in the first place. So I don't think the players will openly bash him. But I think in a subtle way, I expect the overall message to be, it's nearly impossible to win 3 World Cups in a row, but maybe we could have done some things to put ourselves in a better position to at least make it past the round of 16. And I think that's going to fall on Vlatko.
That's interesting. So you think the general vibe of the doc might be, this was probably not going to happen either way. You and I had kind of like the privileged viewpoint of doing a betting podcast this past summer where we were very well versed in the odds, and the U.S. was absolutely an odds-on favorite for most of the tournament. So that would be an interesting retelling of history if that were the case. Mm-hmm. But I think I agree with you. Not all Vlatko's fault. You know, the team construction was weird from the start. The lineups maybe were a little too sticky. The approach maybe not flexible enough. It was kind of like pretty rigid in terms of making it easy for other teams to maybe kind of defend. You know, needed some wondrous moments from like a Lindsey Horan is one that comes to the top of my mind of just very special play to kind of get out of that match. So with regards to the documentary, who are you interested in hearing from?
I think if I had to pick a player at the top of my list, I would pick Lynn Williams, because I think she should have played more. She's super smart. She's very media savvy. Hosted a podcast with the injured U.S. Women's National Team star Sam Mewis. I think they recently announced that they were ending the podcast titled Snacks for their love of eating snacks on the road, from what I gathered. Shout out to Sam Mewis, who is still like on the road to recovery from her knee injury. She did a great job hosting World Cup shows with Raj Bennett from Men in Blazers during the Women's World Cup. Oh, yeah. But I'm very interested to see how Lynn Williams diplomatically says, I should have been on the field more. And I think she should. Again, I don't think she's going to throw Vlatko under the bus, but I think that's going to be a little bit of a theme throughout the 4 episodes.
I'm interested to hear about the players talk about their experience with the other players also. Because I think if this is going to be a 4-parter, how many times can we kind of go back to the Vlatko well? There's got to be some sort of drama. You know, we talked a little bit about like the old versus young dichotomy and like trying to fit players where they don't normally play, trying to get some combination of the best 10 or 11 on the field at the same time. But it can't just be all like that. There's got to be a lot more to the story. It's a point that I kind of hit every time we talk about that World Cup run, sort of like the commercialization angle of like, was everybody kind of a little bit distracted distracted, and I think it sort of showed on the field, a little bit of lack of like cohesion and for sure lack of chemistry, even though you had like great players. So I'm just curious to see if that comes up in any way. We'll see. Definitely something to look out for. I wanted to hit one thing real quick. ESPN had a story today titled USWNT Most Targeted by Women's World Cup Online Abuse. The story was put together by Mark Ogden, senior writer, ESPN FC. According to the piece, over 150 players received targeted abuse on social media. The US team received twice the number of discriminatory or threatening posts of any other competing nation. 7,000 posts were flagged as abusive or threatening. Almost 90% of those came from X/Twitter accounts. So yeah, into the channel pod on Threads, everybody. Let's keep the vibes good over there. To quote the piece, while general abuse accounted for 23.3% of the offending messages, anti-gay messages 20.4%, and messages of a sexual nature 15% were also large in volume. To me, this isn't about the women's game or sports in general. I'm just really of the opinion that when it comes to things that we say and do online, I think we can all do a better job being thoughtful about our online actions as well as holding others accountable in real life for bullshit done online.
Full cosign, buddy. I mean, you see people say this kind of gross shit on the internet, and for a large majority of them, they would never have the guts to say it to anybody in person. And while I think it's overwrought now for people to say, oh, any little transgression and you try to ruin somebody's life, like they try to this whole cancel culture and all this fucking nonsense. How about some accountability? How about not behaving like a piece of trash on the internet? And if you do, people saying, hey, you're being a piece of trash, and then not immediately trying to pivot to now you're a victim all of a sudden. And we've talked about it in regard to the, frankly, online abuse that Megan Rapinoe gets. What really makes a lot of these neckbeards mad is that in these cases, a lot of openly gay women are successful and thoughtful and have opinions on things. And if you don't like it, fuck off is really my general stance on it.
100%. Yeah, and I think there's a way to talk about the games and talk about ideas. We live in a marketplace of ideas of sorts, but to take it, to that much darker place is just, I don't know. Let's all try to do a little bit better, and let's try to keep the people in and around us accountable, much like we would, if somebody was acting a fool like that, in a group setting, you'd pull them aside and be like, yo, that's really, really not cool. So maybe we can extend that out to the digital realm. But yeah, shout out to the team for getting through it. That's definitely not what we want to see anybody have to go through, let alone some of our most elite athletes. Okay, let's shift gears here. NWSL expansion draft right around the corner. I'm not plugged in the slightest. I've got a general understanding of how expansion drafts work from what I've seen from other leagues in the past. What do we need to know about what's coming up here?
All right, so we have two teams coming into the league, and I use that kind of loosely because the NWSL is welcoming Bay FC, who will play in San Jose, in the same stadium that the San Jose Earthquakes of the MLS play in. The NWSL is welcoming back Utah Royals FC, based in Salt Lake City, Utah. Now, why do I say they're being welcomed back? We know there's no relegation in NWSL, but for the uninitiated, speaking of awful behavior, this time not being limited to the internet, Utah Royals FC was established in 2017. They played in the NWSL until 2020. At that point, then team owner Del Loy Hansen and then manager Craig Harrington were outed, essentially, for creating a culture of racism, of sexism, harassment, and verbal abuse. They were investigated by the league and were both sent packing. Now, Del Loy Hansen is a billionaire, so he sold the team, and the team was then moved to Kansas City. Because let's just face it, billionaires and oligarchs of this type rarely face any real consequences. Maybe one day before we die, Dino, we will get to see as working class people, these oligarchs actually be held accountable. I wouldn't hold my breath, but we can dream. Now, for Harrington, he is currently serving a 2-year ban from U.S. soccer, which will be lifted in 2025. And while I thought that sentence was a little light, it's not nearly as comical. I don't want to waste too much breath on these two assholes, frankly. But other clubs were already trying to skirt the ban and hire Harrington as a fucking consultant while he was banned. After players had come out and said this dude was an abusive prick, somebody was still trying to hire the guy. And U.S. Soccer had to go, no, he can't even be a consultant while he's banned. Anybody who wants to look at that, there was great journalism being done in the Salt Lake City Tribune to give you some more background on that. But enough about those dudes. They're fucking out of here. We don't need them anymore. Let's talk about the let me rephrase that. We never needed them for anything, but now we don't have to deal with them anymore is probably the better way to say it. So
Hell yeah.
the expansion draft. Every existing club gets to protect 9 players. Every club will release their protected player list tomorrow. As Dino mentioned, we're recording this on Monday, December 11th. Every club's protected players list will be published on December 12th. Easy for me to say. If one of the expansion teams draft one of those teams' unprotected players, that club then gets the opportunity to select an additional player to be protected. So you get 9 that you automatically protect. You get one of your unprotected players scooped up. You now get to at least reach out and say, okay, here's this additional unprotected player that I'm now moving into the protected zone.
Got it.
Free agents like one Rose Lavelle and some other high-name players, they are not eligible to be drafted. I think Rose Lavelle and Crystal Dunn are probably at the top of that like free agent pool that obviously either of these teams would want to go after, but they're not eligible. And there are 12 rounds in this expansion draft with Bay FC picking first. Deep breath. I'll give you something else that I thought was very interesting. Each expansion team has already made a few moves, which have involved trading for some players from some of the existing clubs. Now, for instance, your hometown Orlando Pride made a trade with each club. They made a trade with Bay FC and they made a trade with Utah, and in exchange for receiving expansion draft protection. So Orlando Pride has already given players to those 2 clubs. They will not have any players selected in this expansion draft. The other clubs who have made trades to get those protections, for Bay FC, they're not going to take from, as I mentioned, the Orlando Pride, the KC Current, or Racing Louisville. Utah will not be drafting any players from Orlando Pride, North Carolina Courage, and San Diego Wave. With all of that said, the expansion draft starts at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. It's on Friday, December 15th, and it's going to be on CBS Sports Network, which I think is pretty fucking rad that it's going to be on pretty much regular television. And I'm going to tune in and check it out, see what happens.
I love that. So this is a pod primarily about women's football, but we do have some men's Champions League Tuesday and Wednesday. Women's Champions League Wednesday and Thursday. Little NWSL expansion draft Friday. I mean, we're going to have ourselves a week, my friend. Anything else we need to know about the draft? Anything else we need to cover domestically?
I think that's about it. I think we talked about the media rights deal in a previous episode for the NWSL. The league is growing in terms of the number of teams. There's a talent influx. There are young, great players who are going to come up through this league. I mean, it just feels like we are entering what could potentially be a golden era of American soccer. This looks like it's going to be one of the pivotal moments in that history. And here we are to watch it. So I'm pretty psyched.
I love that. Yeah. And my Orlando Pride, just light years ahead out here, just, playing chess on this expansion draft, everything protected. Love to see it. All right, man. I think we did it. This has been another episode of Into the Channel. Follow us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you like to watch or listen. Ratings and reviews, always appreciated. At ITC_pod on X, at Into the Channel pod on Threads. Huge thank you to my co-host, Mr. Grand Angle, for dropping some serious NWSL expansion draft knowledge, as well as coming strong with the U.S. Women's National Team. Doc preview. We'll be back next week to pretty much chop up everything that happened this week. And as mentioned prior, this week's pretty fucking loaded. So make sure to follow, subscribe. We're going to have a lot of fun in these coming weeks.
Yeah, man, that was an awful lot of American soccer talk. I got to shake it off me to not go do American things like eat a cheeseburger, buy a semi-automatic weapon, things like that. I just want to make sure I don't get too much America on me after this. So might go upstairs, fire up Peacock, watch one of the Premier League games I missed this week.
I like it. Shout out Peacock. We didn't even get into the Jaden Shaw's goal against China. We'll talk about that one later.
Yeah, she's a player. All right, I'm back. I'm back to American exceptionalism. We're here. Jaden Shaw's coming to fucking crush everybody.
US. Yeah. Oh, yeah. All right, man. I'll catch you next week.
All right. Talk to you soon.